This talk is on Spencer Borden and Interlaken. Somebody actually asked, and it's fine with me, who is Spencer Borden? Like, I know about Interlaken, but who's Spencer Borden? So I want to share with you what I've learned about Spencer Borden. But this is the first time I've given this talk, although I've written about it before. So if I get something wrong, if I say the wrong thing, like I misspeak, and you know better, I have no problem with you telling me that I'm making that mistake. I would rather be corrected and get the right information out there than you worry about my ego in this capacity. Because you may remember it a certain way, and you may have the right answer, and I may not. But then again, I may, so we'll see. But seriously, everybody's told me about their amazing experiences in Interlaken, and even Phil Sylvia said, what did he say to me? He said, he would even risk his pension to go fishing on the North Watuppa again if he didn't have a wife and child to feed. So that means he's not going to do it. So where do we start? We have to start with the Bordens, because Spencer was a Borden. Now, I became interested in Spencer Borden and Interlaken very early in my move to Fall River from Florida, where I was born and raised. And it's through Bill Gonslow that I got involved in this, because through a friend of a friend, he gave us a tour of the Interlaken estate and the ice house, and I was completely and utterly hooked. The Fall River Historical Society has graciously allowed me into their archives. They have quite a bit of the Interlaken house images from the scrapbooks maintained by the Spencer Borden family. So you will see those, some of you will see them for the very first time tonight, the interiors of Interlaken, which is no more. So, oh, those Bordens. A little bit of genealogy is in order. Now, don't go crazy. It's not that weird and complicated and boring, I promise. The Bordens come from Richard Borden. Richard Borden had 14 children, and he settled in Portsmouth, Rhode Island in 1638 from Kent, England. His son, Matthew, you'll note up there, was the first English child born in Rhode Island. He was admitted as an inhabitant of the Isle of Aquidneck and given 5 acres of land, and was one of the 3 men who laid out the lands in Portsmouth. He became the original purchaser of land in New Jersey from the Indians. And he's buried in the Portsmouth Friends graveyard, as is his son, which makes me think that they were Quakers. My guess, because it's a Friends graveyard. So I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to go through everybody, so don't worry about that. So that's not going to happen. Just the people who are in dark, because they're pretty important. So when Richard died, he was really rich. In that period of time when he died, this was his inventory of his will. So we know that he bequeathed to his wife his property, but he gave all the money and all the lands in New Jersey and other properties to his sons. So he made sure that his family was well taken care of. Notice he had a Negro man and woman and 3 Negro children as his possessions. All right, so we're back to that same screen, Richard Borden, and I wanted to point out his son, John. So everything comes through John into Fall River. The other people existed, they had lives, they had children, but Fall River's founded through the John line of the Richard Borden son. So John Borden was a very extensive landowner, and he settled his sons, John, Richard and Thomas. Thomas is highlighted there. He settled them near the Fall River stream, which has to be the Quequechan. He owned land and water power in Fall River. And when Fall River became a town in 1803, there were 18 families here. 9 of them were Borden. They aren't here anymore. Oddly, the Bordens are gone. So, let's see. Yes. So, the first sawmill was made by Caleb Church and Benjamin Church and sold to Richard and Joseph. Now, we're talking about Richard and Joseph of John lineage. John's son, Richard and Joseph, got the sawmill, but it was occupied by Thomas, and that's why Thomas is in black. Thomas gave the sawmill to Richard, his son, and Richard gave it to Thomas and Richard, his sons. So this piece of very, very important property passed through the generations. And Richard Borden, son of Thomas, said that it was said of him that he was accustomed to tell his neighbors that the time would come when all the dams on the stream would be sought after by men who would have the money to pay a great price for them. And he was absolutely correct. He knew that it was the power of the water that would make industry in Fall River, and that would be where all the money would come from. And so he held on to his properties. During the Revolution, which is the anniversary of which was recently, the British landed in Fall River and burned the Borden sawmill that was owned by Thomas and Richard. Richard, Captain Benjamin Borden, and John Neglis were taken prisoner by the British, and they burned Richard's dwelling place. So we had a connection to the Revolutionary War as well here. Now, at this point, we have what has become known as a split in the fortunes of the Borden family. So what we have now are greater and lesser Bordens. Greater means greater amount of cash and greater amount of property, and lesser means nothing. Now, I made the greaters blue and the lessers red just to show the difference so you can see where it breaks down. And it happens with Thomas and Richard. So the sons of, down here on the far right, the sons of Richard and Hope Cook, Richard and Thomas, are now in this screen here. And the reason why the lesser Bordens happened is because Richard here, who married Martha Bowen, left his life with a great deal of debt. He was the one screw up in the Borden lineage. It happened early, and because he owed so much to so many people, everybody who's descendant from his line had to start over. Notice his son is Abraham B. Borden. Yes. His son is Andrew Jackson Borden. His daughter is Lizzie. So there you have the lesser Bordens. Yes. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about some of these really significant lesser Bordens, and I'm not going to talk about Lizzie, so that's not what this is about, but some of her relatives are pretty impressive. So Abraham B. Borden is also in Parallel Lives by the Fall River Historical Society. He was known as a self-made man, and so was Andrew Borden. So all the money that the father made and all the money that Andrew J. Borden made was his own money. He started with nothing. Unfortunately, Abraham Borden, his father, didn't make much of his life. Although he was a kindly man, he was known as a fishmonger, which doesn't sound like he's making a lot of money. But his son Andrew became quite successful, but certainly not rich like the greater Bordens, right? They're millionaires. They're massive landowners. They are mill owners. They are presidents of things. Now, Andrew did become president of a bank. That's true. But he didn't end up, when he died, he had something like about $300,000 worth of land and money, which in today's market might be about 5 or 6 million in today's money. But in 1892, when he was murdered, it was about $300,000 worth of land and property. So let's go back up to Abraham, his dad. So under Richard, he had Abraham, Amy, Hannah, Richard, Rowena, Cook, Lodowick, and Stefania. Should be a T in there in my mind, but her name was Stefania. So I want to talk to you about Hannah. Hannah's important because in May 1831, Mrs. William Cook, Hannah Borden, the aunt of Andrew Borden, was digging on the bank of the Quequechan River on present-day Hartwell and 5th Streets to find sand to scour her pots. And the story goes that a section of the bank gave way, and Mrs. Cook was soon staring into the empty eye sockets of a human skull. With the assistance of her husband and clockmaker John Orswell, the skull and the attached skeleton found in a sitting position was unearthed. We have the skeleton in the armor, discovered by Aunt Hannah. Lovely. Now, the skeleton in the armor was destroyed in the 1928 fire, so it is no more. So let's go back to those greater and lesser Bordens. And Hannah's brother, Lodowick, has a sort of infamous, sad sort of tale to tell. It's very brief, however. Lodowick Borden married a woman, his second of his 4 wives, someone he probably shouldn't have married, Eliza Darling. They lived at 68 2nd Street. Well, I'll show you a picture of that soon. And on May 4th, 1848, Eliza took 2 of their youngest children of 3, Holder, 6 months, and Eliza, 3 years, down cellar and drowned them in the cistern. She went behind the chimney and slit her own throat with a razor, dying soon after. I think we might attest that this might be some kind of postpartum depression because Holder is only 6 months old. One daughter, Maria, who was in her teens, was not home at the time. That's why she survived. So that's Lodowick. Now the house just happens to be right next door to 2nd Street. So at the time, this is the house on the right-hand side. That's the Lodowick house. It's now known as the Kelly house. And that's the murder house of Lizzie Borden's parents right beside it on 2nd Street. This is a model, a scale model of the neighborhood that was on display at a Lizzie Borden museum that opened up in Salem briefly. And he commissioned this, Leonard Pickle commissioned this, and you can see the neighborhood. You can see the Borden house, of course, is in color and all the other ones are in white. But the house to the right is the Lodowick Borden house. The Churchill house is on the left, and in front of the Borden house is the Southard Miller house. Here's another view. So you can see that it was a small building, backyard. This is it today. You'll notice that the art that's on the wall is not there. This photograph was taken for assessment value without those on there. So if you drive by, there's a Marilyn, there's a crazy Einstein with his tongue sticking out, painted on the side. But this is what they did to this building here. They made it look like that. So it's been businesses. It's had a hairdressing salon, a barbershop down front. But the house is sort of still back there. But that's the house now, so you can know that there was a murder next door. But it was in 1848, so we're talking a long time before Andrew even moved into the house next door. So now we're back to the greater and lesser Bordens. And we're going to go to the greater Bordens. We're moving away from those lesser types, sorry. And here are the greater Bordens. These are big-time greater Bordens. Notice Phoebe. Phoebe married George Borden, and she had 4 children by him: Holder, Delana, Sylvia, and Fidelia. You see it on the far right. Holder Borden was the originator of the American Print Works in 1834. He founded that, the largest single ever business to open in Fall River. In the 1870s, during the economic depression, when it failed, it was later reorganized, and MCD expanded it. So we'll have to move over a little bit over to find MCD, but he was a big shot in town, of course, Matthew Chandler, and he took over the company and reorganized it. So Phoebe married Bradford Durfee and had a son. She married Bradford Durfee. Yes, and when she died, Bradford Durfee married Mary Brayton, and they had a son, Bradford Matthew Chandler, BMC Durfee High School. He died young, not like a kid, in his early 20s.
29.
Well, That's young. Yeah, but 29, thank you. I asked for corrections. Yes, that's good. Now I'll always remember, 29. And Mary Brayton, when her husband died, she married William S. Young. So that's why there's all these names up here. But BMC, she built the high school in his honor.
And Stephanie, I remember it was 29 because the bells always chime 29 times.
Oh, wow. She must have made it happen that way, I guess. That's a mother's love.
There were some
A mother's money. She actually became the richest person in the city because of her marriage and because of the money that she ended up, because when Bradford Matthew Chandler died, when all the money went to him, she ended up with all that money. So she was incredibly wealthy. So she built BMC Durfee, and across the street, the church, her sister built that. So the buildings in Fall River that were built by Bordens and Durfees were built by women. The men didn't endow this city with nada. The male Bordens never built a museum. They didn't endow a college. They didn't give back to the city. They took their money and they went to New York, or they went to Boston. So leave it to the ladies who stayed and put their money back into their community. Thank you. So Phoebe's just one, and then you go down from Phoebe's brothers and sisters to Colonel Richard Borden. Colonel Richard Borden was Phoebe's brother. We're talking a busy, busy man. This guy was involved in so many things, just a list of them here. I don't know if you can read them. I don't know if it's vibrating like it was earlier. But this man lived to be 79 years old, or else he couldn't have accomplished all this stuff. He was busy probably from morning to night, founding, investing, organizing, president of this, president of that, a very important person in the history of the city of Fall River. He was even a representative and a senator. He did about everything. So I call that an overachiever, but good for him. So we're back to Colonel Richard's brother is Jefferson Borden. Jefferson Borden, of course, figures into this story because he's the father of Spencer Borden. Ta-da! See, I got you to Spencer. All right. So Jefferson Borden was the father of Spencer. This is him. And this is the house, his first house in Fall River. You might recognize it. It's on High Street. That was Jefferson Borden's house. He's got quite a fancy plot at Oak Grove as well. Now we're down to Spencer. The topic of the night, Spencer Borden. He's a very distinguished looking gentleman. And by the way, is the woman here who asked the question about the horses last time? Oh, good, I have the answer. Okay, Spencer was born in Fall River in 1849. He went to Brooklyn Polytech Institute studying applied chemistry and other arts in cloth production. He graduated in 1868. He was educated at the Sorbonne, graduating in 1870, because I can't pronounce those other words that are on the screen. That's why I said it that way. This man organized the Fall River Bleachery. It was the biggest of its kind in the whole United States. Now, I learned a lot about mill production and cloth production doing all kinds of different projects, but this one was like, what's a bleachery? My guess is they bleach stuff, right? Well, yeah, they do. Because when cotton is made into fabric, to cloth, it's called gray goods. It actually has a gray color to it. And unless you bleach it pure white, it doesn't hold color. So in order to get fabric with color at the American Print Works, where they printed the fabric, you needed somebody to bleach the fabric. So it was the only bleachery in Fall River, so every mill sent their cloth to the bleachery to be bleached. That's a big business. In this city, that was huge. He was very broadly interested in all things scientific, And he was very much involved in the early development of electricity, and in fact served as a representative in New England for his friend Thomas Alva Edison. So we're very sure that Edison came to Fall River several times because Spencer loved to host people and to bring in people. At one point he brought in Stanley from Stanley and Livingston. Remember those? Where Henry Stanley. Livingston disappears and they hire Henry Stanley to go find him. And he finds him in the middle of Africa. And he's like dying and like ill. And they nurse him back to health and give him food. And Livingston goes, bye. And he disappears into the wild again. Because he loved doing what he was doing and he wasn't coming back. And so I forgot that part of the story until I looked it up. I'm like, oh my God, Livingston, okay. So Stanley comes back and does all these lectures. So Spencer brought him into Fall River, and Stanley actually did a lecture on his travels trying to find Livingston in Fall River. He brought people here to talk. He also, there's rumor, well, I don't know, it's a different era, never mind. Okay. Yes? Was he really? Okay, I believe you. Well, he wasn't an explorer. He was a newspaperman, right? He got sent by his newspaper to go find him. So he was in the era of yellow journalism too, so we'll have to see. But he did find him. I think there's evidence of that. So that's Spencer. Now, from 1873 on, he was a breeder of horses. He was the author of 2 books, The Arab Horse and What Horse for the Cavalry. He did provide horses for the cavalry, the American cavalry, from his own breeding stock. He promoted the first endurance race ever held in New England. He invented many appliances, mechanical, electrical, and chemical. And from 1890 to 93, he was a member of W.E. Russell's staff, who was the Democratic governor of Massachusetts, where he received that rank of colonel. And that little picture is W.E. Russell, the governor of Massachusetts. Now, also, Spencer Borden had an amazing cow. That's what the headline in the newspaper said. This is what the newspaper said. I thought it was a great story. 1885, Fall River. Mr. Spencer Borden has a Jersey cow, which gave in 8 weeks 1,950 pounds of milk, which made 140 pounds of butter without any extra feeding, more than 2 times its weight in milk, and an average of 17 pounds, 8 ounces of butter for that time. An amazing cow. That's probably the only thing you're going to remember from tonight, I'm sure. So he died on October 17th, 1921 in Woodstock, Vermont. He was at a hotel, a place he used to go on vacation. He had a massive heart attack and he passed away there. Oh no! That's a long-lived cow. That's funny, George. I like that. No, that's not the cow, that's Spencer. See, it's good that you're telling me as we go along, because you would have walked away thinking the cow died in 1921. That's hilarious. Okay, so when he first came out back from the Sorbonne, he started working as a chemist in the dye and color department at the American Printing Company in 1872. And that's the American Print Company, da-da. And he worked there for 1 year to practice his abilities.
Is that Fall River? Yeah.
Yes, oh yes.
Started as Firestone.
Yes, became the Firestone, had several fires there. It's Borden Remington. It's still there, the building's still there. You'll see big shipping containers pulling up there. They used to have a manufacturing process there more recently for wind turbines. And in the middle of the night, they would take them through the city because they were so massive they had to do it without any, yeah?
Are those Fall River line ships?
Yes. This is actually an advertisement by the American Printing Company. This is their rendition of their plant. There's a big version of this on the wall in Borden Remington in the mill. Dan Bogan, I think, owns the building now. And I think the mayor has a copy of this on the wall in his office. I've been in there and I said, oh, I know what that is. So in 1872, which is pretty soon after he's in town, he organizes the Fall River Bleachery. This is not the cow, this is Spencer Borden. And it was later comprised of 2 mills with $250,000 capital raised to $1.5 million. And it was one of the largest in the nation. I had heard it was the largest in the nation. Jefferson Borden, his father, was the president, and Spencer was an agent and treasurer. And later, his son, Spencer Jr., became president, and then it was liquidated in 1938. And it wasn't because of anything Spencer did. It had everything to do with the crash of the cotton manufacturing industry in Fall River. No longer necessary to have this business here. So I found this really interesting, and your eyes may gloss over and roll up into your head because this is not something you care about, but they went to great lengths to find the perfect place for the bleachery, and it had to be a perfect place. Every stream of importance in Fall River, Tiverton, Somerset, and Bridgewater was examined, analyzed, looking at the watershed and the freighting capacities in order to find the place for this bleachery, because they were willing to put it anywhere as long as they could find the perfect place. They looked at the lower privilege of the Sucker Brook 2 miles from City Hall on Stafford Road near the Rhode Island line. This stream had 1,250 cubic feet per minute flowing into the South Watuppa Pond from Stafford Pond. Stafford Pond was found to be the purest water in the whole region. It sits 225 feet above Mount Hope Bay and had no stream flowing into it and fed entirely by boiling springs in the bottom. It was so clear you could see the fish swimming in the bottom of the lake. The only outlet is Sucker Brook, and it flows falling 75 feet. So it was perfect because they didn't have to, it powered everything because it fell so quickly right into where they wanted to build the bleachery. Now, did I get any of that wrong from anybody? Anybody who knows Sucker Brook like the back of their hand? No? Now, I don't know what Stafford Pond looks like today. I don't know if it's still the purest and the most greatest. No? Well, they didn't pump anything into it from the bleachery. They only took the water from it. So it wasn't polluted by the bleachery. That's one of the things I can say. So here's the 1877 map, a cutaway of where the bleachery is on the left-hand side on the South Watuppa. You'll see Sucker Brook winding its way over to Stafford Pond on the right. This is 1877. It doesn't look like that now. It's very agricultural looking and sparsely populated. This is a Google map of the Stafford Pond, and you can barely see Sucker Brook leaving from it going into the South Watuppa. I know it looks like it's flowing north, but it's actually going downhill. That's why the brook can flow into the South Watuppa. Here's a closer view of it with the bleachery ponds, which they installed and built so that they could pollute their own water. No, they needed water to run certain devices, and they used the ponds there. So here's the site using Google Earth of the bleachery complex as it stands today. One of the mills burned down in, I have it written down here, I think it's 1968? Whatever. I have it down here, it's further in. Here we go. The bleachery was built of stone and granite found on the premises, as a lot of mills in Fall River were. They had to evacuate 13 feet below this point to allow the grand fall of water into the washing machines. And they filled the kiers, which are large vats in which fibers, yarns, and fabrics are boiled, bleached, and dyed, and the boilers without actually pumping anything into the building. The bleachery was built with 12 kiers. Originally, it had a capacity of 24 tons per day. That later was expanded to 50 tons per day. So they had built 2 separate ponds, and then they had a front facing was towards the west, made of brick, and they built a dam there. And towards the south and back was a spring water dam. The first mill was completed in 1873. It included 2 large drying sheds, a storehouse, and a box-making factory for shipping out finished goods. Mill number 2 was added in 1888, and by 1905, the capacity was 50 tons a day. A fire in 1967 destroyed mill number 2, the boiler house, and the connecting buildings. The remaining buildings, including mill number 1, several storage buildings, and a box factory and machine shop, were added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1983, which means nothing, because it doesn't protect anything. Not here. They tear down stuff all the time that's on the National Historic Register. So it's just a register for things that are worthy of of the city keeping. Here's a Bleachery plaque, I guess. Paperweight, yeah. Probably. It said 50 years of service. Here's a picture of the Bleachery. Here's as it stands today. This picture and the one after it was taken by Mark Belanger, who wrote a fabulous book on the mills of Fall River that you can purchase at the Historical Society with color photos and everything. It's an incredibly informative book. This is also his picture of what's left of the Bleachery. And this is their trademark. Okay. So Spencer, the love of his life was Effie Brooks Borden, and they were married in 1871. She was a woman of accomplishment and connection. Now, I don't think that's why he married her. I think that they just ran around in the same social circles. That's how he met her. But she was quite something, and there's a further story about her I'll share at the very end. This is Effie, quite regal, and she looks like a kind woman as well. So Effie was very well traveled and connected. She went to school with Mrs. President William McKinley. So she went to school with the wife of the president. So she got invited to the White House. Actually, she was invited to go to the opening of Grant's tomb. Like, who's buried in Grant's tomb? You know that? Grant? Yeah. Okay, in New York City. So when they christened it, she joined the presidential party in there, and then they said, oh, come back to D.C., be the guest of the White House and the President of the United States. And she goes, sure. So she spent some time in D.C., and she went there periodically, so she was that connected. She was on the women's board of the Fall River Hospital, the Women's Union, and she was given credit, although because she's a woman, everybody forgets, I'm sorry to say, for the establishment of cooperative banks in Fall River. She went to Philadelphia and she saw one in operation on her travels, and she came back and she said, hey, Spencer, I don't know what she called him. Spencer, Colonel, I don't know, what would she call him? Honey, you need to start one of these. These are fantastic. It's a system of banking. So he opened the Troy Cooperative Bank in 1880 and was the first president. The quarters were in the rooms of the First National Bank, and they moved to the old Opera House building. Yes, Fall River had an opera house, which was destroyed in the Great Fire of 1928 and not to be rebuilt. And then they built their own building on Purchase Street on the same site. So he established the Troy Cooperative Bank. That's a big deal for her to say, my idea. And he goes, absolutely. This is Spencer and Effie. They just look so lovely together. I don't have anything bad to say about either one. So if you think this is going to be some kind of a tell-all and a TMZ about really scary stuff going on in this family, it's not. They are creme de la creme as far as I'm concerned. So they had some children, but there are no pictures of the ladies. I cannot find any photographs, and Michael Martin's actually placed phone calls and looked through everything. I could not find any photos of their 2 daughters, Florence and Lenore. So they're here, anonymous, blank, 2 daughters. But we have lots of pictures of the sons, of course. This is Spencer Jr., and I'll show you a picture of him older. This is Alfred. And this is Brooks. Brooks has a special story coming up. So, horsing around. Here's for the horse people that seem to be very interested and worried about the horses last week, because it's important. So, Spencer Borden maintained extensive stables. He was a horse breeder. He bred racehorses that of national recognition. And he was his first interest was in the Hambletonian breed of horses. Then he got interested in Morgans, then Clays, and then polo ponies, and finally the Arabians, which was his big love. He loved the Arabians. And someone asked last week, was he the first person in the United States to breed Arabians? Well, no. Turns out, close, but not quite, Ulysses S. Grant was given to Arabians by the Sultan of Turkey, and he gave one of them or two of them to Randolph Huntington. And Randolph Huntington is actually designated as the first breeder of Arabians in the United States. But very soon after that, 1893, the Chicago World's Fair happened. And actually, Spencer was one of those people that said, you got to take Arabians at the Chicago World's Fair. It's not on the list of horses that are going to be shown. And he really pushed for the Arabian to be there. And so it appeared there, and it became a very popular breed after that, but very expensive still, because you had to import the breed. So historical importations from England and Egypt after the fair. Spencer Borden bought he imported 20 horses and to Interlaken, and this man named W.R. Brown imported 20 horses. And so there were other people doing it at the same time. So he's not exactly the first, but he's very soon found the love of his life with these Arabian horses. So horsing around, yes, this is a postcard that you've probably seen before of the Cotton Centennial, one of the events in the 1911 Cotton Centennial. Wednesday, I think it was Wednesday, one day during the Cotton Centennial week was the Merchant's Day, and there was a horse show in North Park. So this is North Park, turned into a horse arena. And Kismet, the racehorse that was unbeaten during the 1883 and 1884 season, was there. And this is where they had this great show. Now, there were 241 horses entered in 19 classes. Entrance fee was $1 per horse or pair. And the categories include driving horses, saddle horses, pony class, gentleman roadsters, draft horses, delivery wagon horses, and Arabians. Every horse in the 3 Arab classes was owned by Spencer Borden. So he won those, definitely. So he had horses. Here's some photographs of his horses on his property of Interlaken, which comes a little bit later in the story. That's Alfred on a horse. I think I showed you that photo before when I was showing you Alfred.
Yes.
And there's Spencer with the hat, and Alfred on the upper right, and Spencer Jr. I'm talking about down below. So his sons were horsemen. Now Brooks. This is a very sad tale. A few months after Lizzie and Emma purchased their house on French Street, a horrible accident occurred. Not at their house, but nearby because of this story. A sleigh was obtained in January 1894. 28 sophomores from the BMC Durfee High School were on a sleigh ride. Now this is a massive, big, open sleigh where people just sort of lounged against each other, and it was in the snow, accompanied by Everett Brownell Durfee, the Greek constructor at Durfee. His name was Durfee, yes, Durfee. Trip to Swansea, and when they get to Mechanicsville coming back, section of Fall River on Brownell Street, a very bad thing happened. The sleigh was obtained from Charles T. Kirby's stable. One of Kirby's best drivers was at the reins. They were approaching the grade crossing of Old Colony Railroad on Brownell Street. The gates were up. They crossed the first set of tracks. The driver heard the gatekeeper yelling about the train. The gatekeeper and the 5 men who were there could only turn their backs because they didn't want to see what was going to happen. The driver almost got the sleigh over the tracks. The engine of the train struck them 8 inches from the rear of the sleigh. Durfee, the teacher, Charles Clark Chase Jr., Henry Clay Hawkins Jr., Brooks Borden, Orson Alexander Swift, Reynard Thornton either jumped or were knocked off the sleigh. Chase, Durfee, and Haskins all survived. Brooks Borden, the son of Spencer and Effie, was hurled 40 feet in the air. His skull and his body were crushed. Ray Thornton was dragged along in the wheels for 100 yards. His head and right arm were severed. Orson was hurled 20 feet, breathing but unconscious when found. Thornton and Borden, who were deceased, were moved to a shed crossing and examined by medical examiner William Dolan. Orson Swift's father, Marcus G.B. Swift, who was a lawyer in town and lived next door to what later became Maplecroft, the Swift House on the corner of Belmont and French. He was summoned by telephone. He was a lawyer, so he had a telephone then, and he came. They put his son in an ambulance at the scene, and he asked that he be taken to the Fall River Hospital. But Dr. Benjamin Handy told him that it was best to take him home, which is a way to gently tell him that the boy's injuries were fatal. On the way home in the ambulance, his son died. Swift took to the task to personally notify the families of both Borden and Thornton. As he went down High Street, he turned onto French and saw Mrs. Colonel Spencer Borden, Effie, and one of her daughters making a call to the home of Mr. William Carr on Rock Street. He intercepted her. As gently as he could, one heartbroken parent told the other that they were companions in sorrow. Mrs. Borden swayed and just barely was saved from falling. Spencer was overseeing construction of Interlaken, and he heard of the accident and rushed home. A few doors down from the Swift house was the Thornton home on High Street, and he told the mother the tragic news. The father, Charles D. Thornton, overheard the news from an excited telephone conversation that took place in the office adjacent to his in the Fall River National Bank. And that's how he found out about it. So it's an incredibly sad story. And in a note written to the family of her sister-in-law the day after the funeral, Effie wrote this.
The white snow was falling softly all day on the fresh grave of my daughter Brooks. Once I felt that I could never endure to lay one of these dearest ones away, that I should wildly tear away the earth from the loved form. But though it seems as if my heart is broken, thank God the sting of the grave is not with me now. If heaven is the abode of those who seek to do the will of God, of course dear Brooks is there. But Wednesday night, the evening the accident occurred, Thursday, Friday, my heart was torn with the thought he would rather be with us because he loved us at his home. He said, where Mama is home. But Saturday morning, as I looked on his dear bruised face, I thought there was a faraway expression about his closed eyes, and the blessed thought came to me, Brooks is satisfied. What more can I wish than that? My child is satisfied. I can bear my sorrow if he is happy.
It gets even sadder. Duke, the family dog, a mastiff, was never the same and refused to eat for weeks. He kept looking for Brooks at homes of his friends and would sit on the post office steps watching for him. He died of a broken heart. Now, you can't get sadder than that. I'm sorry. That's just too sad. So there was an inquest, of course, and the aftermath of that inquest was they lowered the road to raise the tracks on 4 streets to abolish these grade crossings. They lowered the street and raised the track at the same time on Ferry Street, Danforth Street, the 2 tracks on Brownell Street and Turner Street, all because of this accident, and that's why they're in the air today. Now, an interesting thing happened at the inquest.
Boston Post, February 10th, 1894. the Fall River fatality. Judge McDonough this afternoon held an inquest to learn the causes of the recent Brownell Street crossing slain fatality. Timothy Connolly, the crossing attendant, said that he was compelled to look after 2 lines of track. They are some distance apart, and separate gates were used. When trains were coming, he looked for some signal, either the ringing of the electrical gong in the shanty, by a whistle, or by a bell. On the afternoon of the accident, he heard no warning of any kind. He saw the approaching train when the sleigh was on the track. The engine was then about 150 feet away. He had been looking for the train some 4 or 5 minutes and expected warning of its approach from the signal located a mile away. Had he closed the gates when he first saw the train, he would have hemmed in the whole party. The electrical signal did not work when the special pay train passed along at about 1 o'clock, but it rang for the later trains. He notified Mr. Whedon, the electrician of the road, a very short while after the pay train passed along. Engineer James Clarkin said he did not blow his whistle at any time, but the fireman rang his bell continuously from Brighton Street to Brownell Street. He was only about 130 feet from the party when he saw that he could not escape. He never blew the whistle before approaching Brownell Street crossing except in cases of fog. Electrician H.S. Whedon's testimony was of great interest. He said he had been notified that the electrical apparatus in Connolly's shanty was out of order. It was his business to see that it was in order. He tested it and found the difficulty was not what he first suspected. He intended to look after it, but had a more important job in Middleborough, where the trouble with the telegraph, demanding his prompt attention according to railroad rules. Colonel Spencer Borden obtained permission to ask Whedon some questions. Mr. Borden is an expert in electricity, and that fact, coupled with his earnestness in asking witnesses practical questions, seemed to fix the responsibility on Whedon, and caused the latter to grow very much frightened. One question, preceded by a remark to the effect that they were at least getting some light on the cause of the accident, was too much for Whedon's strength. He grasped helplessly at the rail and was falling lifeless to the floor when Everett B. Durfee ran to him and carried him fainting into the corridor. Mr. Whedon's assistant, Officer Martin, also testified. At the conclusion of the testimony, Judge McDonough reserved his decision. It is generally agreed that all responsibility would be placed on the Railroad Corporation and indirectly upon the electrician union. Just after the hearing, Messrs. Swift, Borden, Clark, Chase, and Thornton, whose children were killed or injured, went to Crossing Tenor Connolly and Engineer Clarkin and said they held them in no wise responsible.
So that's why it's up now. This is Brownell Street crossing. This is from the ground. This is before I think they've redone it because they were all rotting away. Okay, now we move on to this amazing thing. Well, I call it the Rock Street residence. This is an amazing thing. Spencer Borden, look at this house. He lived on 487 Rock Street before he went to Interlaken, the corner of Maple. So you have to imagine the Fall River Historical Society on the right-hand side of this picture, off to the right, because it was right across the street. Next door, you'll notice that house is very famous, actually. Lived his cousin, his first cousin, Richard Baxter Borden. It is this is a close-up of the house. It's just enlarged from the other shot. It's a massive house. John Moriarty's house on 511 Rock Street was next door. Now, this house was built by Joseph Remington in 1858, who lived there until 1864. And Spencer Borden purchased the land and the house on Rock High and Maple for $22,200 at auction from the estate of Hale Remington. He renovated and enlarged the existing structure. He transferred it through a series of different sales to his wife Effie, who became the owner of the estate, the owner of the house. And so this is the plot of land that he bought with the house on it. There are now 4 houses on that plot of land. That's how big that residence was. So those are the 4 residences that are there now. In 1893, he sold it to James Madison Morton for $1 plus considerations, which it doesn't mean he sold it for $1. It means he didn't want anybody to know what the amount was. I learned that. So just to let you know, he didn't sell it for $1. And he moved to Interlaken. Morton died in 1923. His wife Emily died in 24. And the house was occupied by James Edward Newton, treasurer of Bernard Mills, who lived there only for about 1.5 years till he moved to Little Compton. And then it was vacant for 9 years, from 1927 to 1936. According to the city directories, it says vacant. And then all of a sudden it becomes no address at all for 6 years. So starting in 1942, these houses are going to be built up. So we've got the 485 Rock Street was built in 42, 497 Rock Street was built in 1943, 422 Maple Street, same year, and the High Street house, which was the Carey Borden house, was built in 1942. So all 4 of those houses were built in the early 40s. So, but Spencer Borden left it in 1893 because he had another place to go. He had Interlaken, yay! But does anybody know what happened to that house, the big Spencer Borden house in Fall River? Philip's History of Fall River says that it was just demolished, but there was a rumor floating around that it had burned to the ground, and I haven't been able to find anything, and I'm not going through every single day of the Fall River newspaper to find it out. Just to know if anybody knew. Anybody? No? If you do, I'm really deeply interested because I got into this crazy focus trying to find out what happened to that house moment. Anyway, so here's Interlaken from a postcard. They called it the big house, not because it's a prison, because it's a big house. It is the closest I think Fall River ever came to a Newport mansion, a Newport type mansion. All right, let me go back. Interlaken. Probably named after the Swiss township in the German-speaking Alps called Interlaken, which was known as the word means land between the waters. It was one of the oldest tourist resorts in Europe. At the turn of the century in Fall River, the pond levels were manipulated to turn the North Watuppa into Fall River's primary source of drinking water, which you heard about last week from Bill. They separated the North and the South Watuppa, regulating the flow of the North Watuppa and its tributaries. The highway that goes between the 2 ponds, actually, North and South Watuppa, is a dam. It is according to John Fryer, it actually has a designation not of a highway at that point, it is a dam. So a study was conducted by the city since both ponds are the primary source of the Quequechan River, and they wanted to focus on the North Watuppa and save it. So they hired Arthur Safford, a Lowell engineer, to do a study on what they should do. And he recommended that the city condemn and purchase all public and private land surrounding the North Watuppa. Interlaken, poised out in the middle of the pond, surrounded by the very waters the city was trying to control. So here we have some problems, because the city wanted Spencer to get out of there, and Spencer's like, no way, I just built this house. So Mayor John Coughlin, speaking at the Real Estate Owners Protective Association, that sounds interesting, he claimed, quote, "The cultural gentleman of Ward 8 cares nothing for the people of this city." Borden proposed to the local Board of Health limited public access as a compromise, seasonal licenses to boaters and fishermen, so they could limit the amount of activity on the lake. Coughlin accused Borden of wanting the North Watuppa all to himself. Borden went to that same group, the Real Estate Owners Protective Association, and said, quote, "Any man, it makes no difference who he is, that says or said that I was looking for the exclusive privilege of fishing and boating on the North Watuppa is a liar," unquote. In 1909, Safford made 9 recommendations, and one of the recommendations was, quote, "The Spencer Borden house at Interlaken, although having an arrangement for the disposal of sewage, should be controlled by the city of Fall River," unquote. Ultimately, the city did not challenge Spencer Borden any further, or legally or directly. He was an alderman also. So he was in local government. And he just said no. And he was Spencer Borden. And he had connections. And he went fishing on it all the time. So there you go. So this is Google Now. This is a recent flyover, I guess, of what Interlaken is. This is, I guess, during a sort of a dry spell where the water is dry in the top part. But this is Interlaken. I think Bill mentioned last year when the city finally took this property, they took not only the land, but the land under the water, so that there was no way that anybody could build up there again. But this is what it looks like now. I found a picture from 1938, surveyed. That's what it looked like then. And this is after Spencer died, of course, but before the big house was demolished. So you can see the big house in the upper sort of right-hand side. That's the big house with the drive going up to it. That driveway that you see straight going up into that area, he named it Acacia Drive. There's Spencer Borden Jr.'s house in the lower right-hand southeast corner of the property. And down off to the far left are the remains of the ice house. You'll see the roof open. These buildings here, beside the leftover buildings between Spencer Borden's house and the ice house, I was hoping Bill would be here so he can help me identify them. My guess is they're part of the Interlaken farm system. He raised horses. He had cows, the amazing cow. He had chickens, and Spencer also had his farming interests and his interests in and his kids living there. So my guess is it was just part of the property. It was called Interlaken by Spencer. Spencer called his house the big house, and he called the small house Interlaken Jr. And it was smaller. It was an odd-looking house, an interesting-looking house. But this is Interlaken 1938 without that on it. But when you walk out there, you're walking in that, okay? Just to let you know, not like that. It would be cool. And we talked last week about this house, the Cunningham house that was moved to Bark Street. And the current owners were apparently here. And this house was actually physically moved from Interlaken, the space, the Cunningham Island, which was his real name, over to Bark Street. And that's where it sits today. Here is a postcard showing both houses. Both Spencer Jr.'s house, Interlaken Jr. on the right, and the big house on the left. This is the driveway main entrance postcard. There were stables, the ice house, barns. There was a boating house. You reach the big house by Acacia Avenue. There's the big house. Yes, that's an ooh and an ah moment. Ooh, it's so big. There's an even better photo I'm going to show you in a little bit. So there's the big house. And I'll show you some pictures from the water. Why would he give this up just because the city wanted him to? I'm serious. It was Shangri-La. And where else in the city would he be able to breed his Arabians? It's not like he had like a pig farm. I mean, there were pig farms along the North Watuppa that they had to get rid of, and all that pig stuff was going into the water supply. He didn't have the pig thing. So the grounds of Interlaken. These are photographs from the family albums that are housed at the Historical Society. This is in the front yard of the house. It's a gate. It spared no expense, obviously. This bell tower has a story. The bell that he installed in his bell tower was from the Mission La Purísima Concepción in Lompoc, California. He set up an electrical clock synchronized to the sound of the bronze bell because he knew electricity and Edison was his friend, so he was extremely proud of his bell. And he actually did a talk about his bell, and it became a book called The Bell and Its Story. He took a lot of pictures of his bell. Well, it's an interesting story. Now, I can't figure out where the bell tower was from the air, and I don't know if it was still there in 1938, but my guess is it's up towards the big house somewhere. And from that picture here with the wall going around, my guess, and also here the wall, my guess is it's probably in the back area of the upper left-right area there. But I can't quite see it. But I wanted to look, and I was hoping Bill would be here so he could tell me. Huh? You're here! Okay, yay! Where's the bell tower?
As you look at the island, there's a rear causeway coming off the back.
Yes.
If you look at the right side of that causeway, you sort of move up, there's a little road back there. You can see a dark spot with the wall going through. The bell is right there. It's oriented from north to south.
That's so exciting. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
We dug it out.
Awesome. Now, the original site of the mission, there was an earthquake in 1812, and the entire mission was ransacked at the time. Not by Spencer Borden, so it's not anything like that. But it was ransacked, and the bell ended up with Borden. I'm happy to say the bell has returned. This is the new mission that was built more recently, about a mile and a half away from the old mission in Lompoc. And here's the bell tower. Oddly, my brother lives in Lompoc, one of my brothers. And he took me here to try to scare me with ghost stories. Because there's supposedly this monk walking around. You know, I don't believe any of that, but it was good fun in the dark. I didn't know at the time that I was in the presence of the bell. And I was living in Fall River at the time. So I was in both places within the same week, the bell and Fall River. It was like, gosh, it's a really small world if you think about it. So back to the grounds. The grounds of Interlaken had majestic lawns, stone walls, elaborate plantings, orchards, somewhat of a golf course, but I'm guessing it was mostly a putting green because I haven't seen anything to indicate that it was a full head-on golf course. It looked like it was a practice place. But he also had tennis courts, hiking trails, and of course horses and fishing. So very much this was an outdoors family. That wall is still there. Goes right out into the water. That's looking from the house at that gate that I showed you close up. And here's these people putting. And it is at Interlaken, but I don't know. I've yet to see anybody tell me for sure there was a full golf course or 9 holes or just one course. Do you know?
I've always
Bill?
maintained that it's not there. That looks to be the Fall River Country Club. If you look at
Oh, they stuck it in their collection over there then. They like to putt. It's probably the family putting. Thank you. Misinformation, not true fact. Now we know. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
fake news.
Fake news, yes. They had it in their collection, probably because the family was there, but it was unmarked and unidentified. This is Spencer Borden Jr.'s house. See how very different it is from Spencer Borden? This is Interlaken Jr. And this is Interlaken Jr., the other side. Those aren't people, I don't think, because they'd be wearing like blankets. I just don't know what that is. It could be hedges or plants that are up in there, but it just, I thought they were people when I first saw it. I was like covered mourning Portuguese women, you know? Now the Borden family in Interlaken. This is the best picture ever. That's Spencer and Effie outside on their yard. Note, I will show this again to you because when we get to what's there now, but notice the front windows. They're like half turrets that come out. Also the porch on the side, on the right-hand side. That's one of my favorite places there because some parts of it are still sort of there. But I love this picture. This is how big it was. All the photographs you see of the family in the next series were taken on the back side of the house in a smaller portico opening that they used primarily, it looked like, for photographing. And they had like a trellis and a kind of chicken wire where they built ivy. They had ivy go through. So they had this beautiful sort of photographic area. I believe these are the two daughters, but I can't confirm it. Notice the bell tower in the back. And they're fishing from the shore. So this may be the only picture I have of those two daughters, but I can't confirm it. This is Effie with her chauffeur in front of Interlaken. And there's the grand man with his spaniel in front of his house. He looks like Edison to me there, all in white. He had a lot of dogs. He loved dogs. He loved animals of all kinds. This man on the far left is like photobombing a lot of these pictures. He's always wearing this bow tie too, so I don't know if he's a servant or if he's his friend. But he's always like lurking behind some bush and smiling. So he had all kinds of dogs. It looks like a mastiff and the spaniel, a black dog, Saint Bernard, okay. And then the servant is in the window going to feed the dogs. And they're waiting for there's the guy again. He's like, take a picture of me, I'm here too. He's later also, yeah, there's two spaniels. Yes, it's not a dog with two heads. It really is. An amazing dog. He had an amazing dog. It had two heads, yes. Kind of looks like that, right? But where does it go to the bathroom if it's got two heads? I don't know. So there she is again. Different shot. Oh, there's the man. He's like leaning in further. I have no idea who he is. He's got kind of a pointy little thing. So this is Effie, and I believe one of the daughters, and I don't know who it is. That's on the back side of Interlaken with the blooming ivy. Spencer and Effie, same location. There's so many photos taken in this location. It must have been their favorite little spot. The dog in the background. There's always an animal in their pictures. And when I show you some pictures later on of Spencer Jr.'s son, you will see dogs everywhere. I mean, they love their dogs. I don't see a dog here, but I bet he's standing behind them. This is Spencer in the middle, I suppose, and Effie with her son. I think the other son, and perhaps a daughter or the son's wife. Again, they, like you, didn't write on the back who was in the picture. So I highly recommend you go through all your pictures, not even digitally, and put metadata in there so you can identify all these people for the future. There's Spencer on the North Watuppa fishing with the little man with the bow tie in the back of the boat. So he stood up to fish. There he is, the little man in the bow tie. And of course, the guy to row the boat. Looks like Spencer caught something there.
Oh, yeah.
And this is them enjoying their winter, back to sleighing, but with a horse and on their own property. And that's the big house in the wintertime. Interlaken interiors, you're in for a treat. This is probably what you came for. Maybe not. It's what wowed me. So we're going to go inside the house. Of course, the house is gone. I'll tell you why. We're now going to see the foyer or receiving room of Spencer and Effie Borden's home on Interlaken. You notice the ceiling has wallpaper on it. How cool is that? I want wallpaper on my ceiling. Hear that? This is the foyer entranceway. There are fireplaces all over in every room, more than one in some places.
Open floor plan.
Yes, isn't it? Absolutely. They had to break up the rooms with screens, folding screens. So this is looking the other direction towards the dining room. See, there's a fireplace on both sides of the foyer. This is the foyer. Do you have two fireplaces in your foyer? I want two fireplaces in my foyer. The front entrance, which is very unassuming, entering into that grand room, this is the front door. And the screen on the right, you'll see in another shot because we're taking the picture from the dining room. I really like those benches. It's not just a bench, is it? It's a piece of furniture.
And it's a storage piece.
Yes, it is. Practical. So now we go to the turnaround from the last picture, and we're going to look at the formal dining room on the right of the main entrance as you go in. Notice the screen. And the bird. Of course, it's a statue. The grand living room on the first floor, which is the opposite side. I want a grand living room.
Wonder what happened to the artwork.
Well, when he died while the house was still there. So I imagine his estate, his daughters and his sons, most of them were still alive. I'll tell you about Spencer. So I'm sure that they got those things, either sold it or kept it in the family. One piece of furniture is actually at the Historical Society. I'll show you which one. This is the sitting room or study on the second floor just off the stairs. That desk right there is Spencer Borden Sr.'s, Jefferson Borden's desk. And that's at the Historical Society on the third floor and not to be seen yet. I don't know why, but it's no room, right, to put it downstairs? That's the story. But the society has that piece, which was owned by Jefferson Borden and then Spencer Borden. It is open plan, isn't it? Very modern. Another fireplace. And that's the same room looking back towards the stairs. See, I don't know if I could study without closing myself up into a room. So there aren't many doors in this house. But there's a third floor because I see the stairs going up. Possibly upstairs, another sitting room or study, another fireplace. And this window here on the right-hand side, there's a photograph at the end of us looking out that window onto the grounds. Big carpet. Now, this is Effie Borden's bedroom. You're not going to see her bed because they didn't take pictures of where women slept back then. And note the family photographs adorning the mantel and the English-style furniture in contrast to the modern wall-to-wall carpeting. So she had a lounge, a fireplace. The pictures hung from the woodworking at the top of the room, just like Victorians did.
Yeah, the Historical Society says.
Yep. Lots of things on the walls, but around and sconces, pointing up, not down. And this is looking through that window outside from that picture before this one. So we're looking right out onto the Watuppa. And that may be a tennis court, Bill, in the distance?
Could be.
Could be. I might get something right. Yay. Now, Interlaken now. We're going to the big house. What was the big house? Now, this is what was. Again, I want to note the round turret, half turret windows. Notice the 3 steps behind between Effie and Spencer, and then the porch on the right-hand side. Here are those steps. Someone else lived in the house after Spencer lived in it, and then the city finally got its mitts on it and went in and demolished the house because of the water supply. Because there were probably very good reasons why they couldn't turn it into anything else because I don't know if it had sat for a while or if it was in disrepair. Can you imagine the maintenance on a house like that? The city doesn't pay for anything still. So it's a tradition in Fall River, when you can't afford it, you tear it down, seriously. But other than that, they've been waiting and waiting and waiting to get their hands on this property to own it, to condemn it, and to possess it. And that's why it's off limits to you and me, except on special occasions like permitted tours, which Bill's going to run next weekend, next Saturday. So this is one of those turrets, the half turret. I'm standing in the foundation, what's left of the house. And there's one turret. There's the steps behind this gentleman here leading into the front foyer would have been right there in front of this woman where she's standing. And the other turret window is on the other side. That's it from the ground looking down into the foundation. And there's Bill, yay! He's got this great big blow up of the house, and he's standing there and he's telling the story of the house in his great way. And he's bringing us back to the history and showing us the reality of today in front of those steps. And like I said, it was Bill that got me excited about this entire place. So I will give it to him. This is what's left of Acacia Avenue. The interior of the foundation with our friend. Over on the right-hand side, the elevated area, that was the porch that I pointed out in that other picture that was covered by part of the house that overhanged. That's how deep it was. How tall is John? How tall is John, Michael? 5'10", 5'9", so his little head sticking out. His big head. He doesn't have a little head. So it was pretty massive. This is what's left of the porch with some porch holes, I guess, for sturdying up those columns that were there, those Greek revival columns that were there. This is the tile that's still there. And I actually brought my little stolen thing here. Well, there's no cops in here, right? None of you are police officers, right? I have a tile from Interlaken. Yes, I had to take it. I'm sorry. It was just laying there saying, take me, take me. You want something that Spencer stood on. And I was like, I do. Thank you, evil self. Yes. So anyway, it's still quite colorful. This was it was a portico, really, porch. I've been here on many tours with Bill. I think I've only ever been here with Bill. So I've been in the winter, I've been in the summer, I've been in the fall. Anytime he's going, I'm there because it always looks different based on the season. There I am a long time ago, actually, with Bill. We were even there in the winter, and I have some pictures to share. But that's part of the boathouse that's left. I think that tree had a fireplace for lunch. Yummy. Now, I had an Interlaken adventure with Bill. Not Bill and other people. It wasn't just Bill. But Bob Kitchen was there, and Phil Sylvia was there, and Brian Kurt was there. And we were going to go look at Interlaken in the winter. And it was that year in 2011, I wrote it down, February 12th, 2011. That was the year we had all that snow, and it wouldn't go away. And then it kept piling on, and it was so cold, so long, that the snow never melted for a really long time. It was like several weeks, I think. Well, remember when Bill talked about the ice industry and how global warming has probably caused them not to have it be possible to grow ice, harvest ice anymore, besides who wants to do that, right? Those horses and all that kind of stuff. But the Watuppa hasn't really frozen like it used to. This year it did. And the snow was so thick, we could not get to Interlaken, the house, the remains, through the regular walking, because the snow was about this high. So my little legs would go right up to here, here. So we had to get another way to get to the house. We walked on the water. It was frozen. Yes, and it was the greatest Fall River experience I have ever had. And I didn't mean to do this to both of these fine men. And it was pointed out to me recently that I was giving them rabbit ears, but I didn't mean to. But that's Phil Sylvia, of course, you'll see next week. And there's lovely Bill with his Watuppa hat. I want a Watuppa hat. And there we are. Now, there's other people in this. There's Mr. Kitchen and Phil, and that's Mark Belanger and Jack Feria. And there's more people than this that went. But there we are standing on the Watuppa. And these guys, I was the only girl, wasn't I? I think I was. And these guys were like a kid in the candy store walking on the water. They wanted to crawl on all the rocks. They wanted to mess around. They were like, all of a sudden, they were 12 again. So this was the Watuppa frozen over that year. And you'll see a picture of their glee. Look at their glee. They're so happy. It was grand. It really was. There's the group. And of course, they had to climb the rock. Boys will be boys. I did not climb the rock. I was unsure of myself. I'm a Florida girl. I've never walked on ice before. If it wasn't for Brian Kurt, I probably would have stayed behind because he stayed with me and helped me walk on that so that I wouldn't fall and break my face. So thank you, Brian. I will always remember that. And there they are. They didn't have a smile on their face that day. No rabbit ears in that photo. And then we go to another sad story. It's not tragically, horribly sad like a sleigh accident, but it is sad. Now we'll talk about Spencer Borden briefly. He was a Harvard grad, took over the family business, but I told you that it failed because the cotton manufacturing business in Fall River went kaput. He was director of the Shawmut National Bank in Boston, vice president director of Fall River National Bank. He was on the school board and the planning board. And in 1901, he married Sarah Hildreth Ames, who was very well connected. He had Blanche Butler, who just died in 96, Spencer III, who died at the age of 6 of complications of pneumonia, Joan, who died in 95, Ames, who died at 18, just 3 days short of his 18th birthday of polio, and Richard, who died in 1999. So Richard Borden lived the longest of the family, lived longer into the 90s. He was a member of the Q Club, the University Club. He was a yachtsman, and he went his wife died in 31, and he was a bachelor from 31 till his death in 57. He attended every Harvard-Yale football game for 65 years, and he actually had the H pennant, so he had to show up because it was his duty to do the H for the Harvard. So, and he wintered in Nassau. He traveled to Europe every summer. So he was not a poor Borden, a lesser Borden. He was a greater Borden. Traveled to Europe every summer. His apartment in Providence was constructed from the cabin of the Vanity, a cup-winning sloop. And he died in 57 at the age of 84 in Providence. Here is Spencer Jr., very distinguished-looking gentleman. Here's his wife. She was very, very pretty. Here's Blanche and Joan. They may be reversed. It may be Joan and Blanche. Michael, are you here? Michael Martins?
Yes, what's that?
Is that Blanche and Joan or Joan and Blanche? Joan and Blanche. Ta-da! Thank you. Now you know. Reverse. Spencer III, the little boy who died at 6 of complications from pneumonia. Richard Borden and Ames Borden. Ames Borden died of polio. And his mother bought him a photograph album and a camera when he was 13. And he started taking pictures. So he took these photos in the 5 years before his death in 1926. And they're from the scrapbook, which he named Ames Borden. He inscribed it that his mother gave it to him, and a camera. And he had dogs. And he named his dogs. They had funny names like Meddler. There's his brother Richard. And the dog's on his brother. Richard Borden, his pals. Coon Dog, I guess that's the name because it was for hunting purposes. There's Meddler again, running right to the camera, as little boys will do, take pictures of their animals. Chickens, we'll take some pictures of chickens. They had chickens. And the dog here is named Jack O-Orang. Jack-O-Orang. Jack-O-Orang. Richard Borden and B. Wallace in 1921. And notice on the right, the big house. The garage of Spencer Borden's house, Spencer Borden Jr.'s house, excuse me. B. Wallace and Richard Borden cutting up. Jacques Ourang. Spencer Borden Jr.'s house, which is his father's house. The dog with Richard Borden. B. Wallace, the dog. They went to baseball games, and Phil was all excited about this one, of course. He's like, baseball, baseball. It's not Fall River. I think it's Andover. Big house, climbing around. Pigs, yes, they had some pigs, but not a whole slew of pigs. Not like pig farmers. There's Joan. One picture of his sister instead of all the ones of his brother, Richard. Workhorses, because they don't have names. They're the workhorses. The south lot on the left, 1922. Jack-a-ring, and the big house in the background. Lots of pictures of dogs. See, they love their animals. They were friends of the family. The top house is in Mattapoisett, but the bottom house is Interlaken Jr. Notice that's actually what they called it, Interlaken Jr. And there's the photographer taking a picture of his dog. Great shadow. There's a dog in almost every photo. Now this photo appears on the back of the album. It's a picture of an empty bed. Remember, Ames died of polio. I think his sister probably put this there or, as a memento of where he spent his last days. Ames Borden is buried in Oak Grove Cemetery. And the family plot in Oak Grove shows Brooks Borden on the left, Spencer in the middle, and Effie on the right. And that's Spencer Borden and Interlaken. Do you have any questions that I can't answer? That Bill can answer? Yes.
How did the city end up taking it over?
They condemn the property like they do. They'll just condemn it, and then they pay whoever is owning it a determined amount based on the value. Yes, eminent domain. They eminent domained it for all the buildings. The ice house had been vacant for long time, so there was nobody to pay there. But they took the property, and yes.
I wasn't here last week, but which Spencer Borden is the school named after and why?
Spencer Borden Jr. Yes, Spencer Borden, our Spencer Borden. The subject of this story. I said I was going to say an Effie story, and the Effie story is this. I found this in the newspaper. In 1909, Effie furnished and equipped all the kindergarten schools throughout Fall River as a memorial to Brooks. That may be one of the reasons. Now, the schools are named after prominent people in Fall River, and of course, Spencer was one. So it's not the Spencer Borden Jr. School, it's Spencer Borden School. So it's named after Spencer. Yes, I forgot about that, yes.
One of the pictures you had, and it went by too fast.
I'm sorry.
I noticed it, about the horses in the Centennial in the North Park, you said?
Yes,
Right in the middle of that is a school.
yes,
That was the original Spencer.
yes, and it burned down.
And it burned down.
Yes.
Right in the park.
I know somebody who was there the day it burned down. There he is.
Well, I lived across the street. so
Yeah.
I remember.
He told me that story about like going, ooh, the school's burning down. No.
But that was the original.
Yes, that was the original Spencer Borden School, and then it's on President Avenue, yes.
Look back at the picture of the accident scene.
The tracks?
People might be interested in stuff. This picture was taken looking towards President Avenue. And Brownell Street is, of course, right there where the accident happened. If you look in the background, it looks like there's an overpass.
Right.
You see it?
Mm-hmm.
That's what people in Fall River and rode the trolleys call the mountain.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. That was a set of stairs that went over the railroad tracks because the old Colony Railroad would not allow the Globe Street Railway with tracks across the old Colony tracks. So people coming in from Providence and Swansea and Taunton, the trolley stopped right there. They had to get out, climb the stairs, walk across the top there to the tracks, and go down the other side, and get on a trolley on the other side. Take it into the city.
What happened if you were handicapped? Tough luck.
You're out of luck.
You're out of luck. That's right. Yes.
land for Interlaken originally part of the Native American reservation?
Oh, no, it was called Cunningham Island, according to Bill from last week, and it was owned by Cunningham, and he had that store down on in the Flint. They showed a picture of it last week, and it was called Cunningham Island, and he had a house there that was then moved to Bark Street later. They actually picked up the house and moved it like they used to do, and so it wasn't a part of the reservation, no.
Was Spencer Borden still living there?
He was living there when he died in 21, yes.
Oh, he was still living there.
Yes, he made sure they weren't going to take it in his lifetime. Now, there was another family who lived there after him for a period of time that lived there, bought it, I guess, and lived there. And it was after that family moved out that the city said, you need to move out, and they paid them. So the house was occupied for a while after by a different family.
Did Effie die before him?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't notice her death date. I don't think I had it on there. I don't think so. I think she outlived him.
So she would stay in the house?
She stayed there until she died, I'm sure. Or she moved someplace else after he died. I mean, a single woman with grown kids living in a big house like that, I would imagine that she'd move someplace else if she could. That's just me, but it's a beautiful place. I mean, did you enjoy those pictures of the interior? And now when you go there on Saturday, you can go, oh, what used to be. And I can't be mad about the tearing of it down because I can't tell you exactly what was going through their heads and why they needed to, legally, to protect the water supply. It would have been great if it was a tourist attraction. It'd be great if it was a hotel. It would be great if it was stayed there. But can you imagine, I'm saying, the maintenance, and Fall River doesn't pay to maintain its parks or its cemeteries. It's not going to pay to maintain that house. So, yeah.
You didn't know about the Jefferson Borden house, his first house.
Yes. Yeah, I did. I showed the picture.
No, why it was there, how it got there.
Oh, the Jefferson Borden house, that first house that's now on High Street, it was originally on Canal and Anawan, down by Crab Pond. And it was moved to that location. In the 1860s, yes. A lot of houses were moved. When they built Charlton and they had those grand houses in there, a lot of those houses were actually picked up and moved, and they're in other parts of the city. 14. Michael used to worked for the phone company, and he was present at the moving of some of those houses because he had to hold the lines back, the telephone lines, when the truck came by with the house. He has a story about one of those trucks actually sort of starting to, right? And he really thought the whole house was going to go over, right? Yeah, the house caught the pole started to bend over, but...
And I was on the pole.
And he was on the pole, yeah.
I saw the screen.
Can you imagine them moving houses now? I mean, they just wouldn't even think of it. But back then, the houses were moved. Yes?
So when I was teaching in the early 70s, the school department owned property called Camp Interlaken. And they had classes there. So I never knew exactly where it was, but...
Anybody know?
It wasn't there.
It wasn't there.
It wasn't there?
It was in the Copacut?
Quantico Road, which is now the Copacut Rifle Society. It was an old training camp for the military back in the Second World War.
He knows so much.
Well, one of the things that...
Yes.
Jack
Orang, yes.
Yeah, there's a famous line of Airedales, and that looks like an Airedale to me. Orang line.
Oh.
So the dog's name was obviously Jack. I guess the kid called it Jack.
Oh, so it was the breed. Oh, awesome. I love learning new things. That's great. Now the next time I'll act like I know what I'm talking about when I do it. Yes. I'm sorry? That's what she asked too. Did Effie leave when Spencer died? But he died in 21. I would imagine it was soon after that they left because their children were grown at that time. But Michael, what was the name of the family that lived there after Spencer Borden?
Oh, the Andrews family.
The Andrews family. And they lived there, do you know how long?
Until the city took it.
Until the city took it.
Now, what about Junior? Did his house stay there?
He was globetrotting and living in Providence, and he moved on, and his kids were grown up, and his wife had died, and he was sailing the ocean blue. He was a yachtsman, and he had his own life. So in '38, when that picture was taken of the over of it, that was the failure of the Bleachery. That was the same year the Bleachery failed, I think, '38. But it doesn't mean he failed and lost money. It just meant he closed it down. Yes?
What was the date again that Brooks was killed in this way?
1894.
1894, January 1894. Yes.
Just remembered it.
You were very good to remember a date. It'll be on the exam.
I also remember my grandparents telling me they were so proud that the North Watuppa Pond was known as having the clearest, best water in the whole country.
No, Stafford apparently was better than North Watuppa, but North Watuppa is fed by springs as well. Yes, it used to be better, yes. Yeah, years ago. Yeah. Well, it's one of the largest bodies of water in the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth, and it's the second largest natural lake in the Commonwealth. And if you want to buy water to go fire a nuclear plant, then yeah, you can buy some water.
And they want to sell it, right?
Yeah, yeah. So you can't fish in it, so you can imagine the size of the fish in that lake now. You can imagine. So I'm sure a lot of fishermen are like, oh man, if I could only get a day on that water. It would be great if the city would allow like a day of fishing. Just a day. Nobody can take any food. Nobody can take any bottles of water. Nobody can take any trash. No plastics, no nothing. But let people out there just to fish for a minute or have a contest and just see how big those things are. Yeah. Somebody over here? No? Yes, sorry. Yeah.
I read once that the North and the South Watuppa are connected. Are they still connected?
There's a dam between them. That's the highway.
Yeah, but I mean, does the water from the south and the north mingle?
Not anymore. There's a dam.
There's a gate that all water, there's a dam gate.
Yes.
That area years ago, I remember my father called that area the waters, the narrow.
No, the Narrows were you know where White's is and the restaurant LePage's? That was the Narrows. That was where the Narrows was, the venue, where the music venue that's now down by the battleship.
You can get that book in the Historical Society.
Yeah, yeah. That was the Narrows.
The Narrows.
It was a narrow part of that area. There used to be a crab shack on there. Carnival. Oh, the carnival. Yeah. Everybody's hungry now. Thank you very much, everybody. See you next week.